Hey everybody, how's it going out there in YouTube land? Well, here we are, we're back with this Tamiya Leopard 2 A6 with the Ukraine decals. And what we're going to move on to working on here is the side mirrors. Now, I could have put these on before I primed out the hull, but I just wasn't sure how I wanted to proceed with these. But after looking at some references, I've decided that I'm just going to glue these on at this point and come back and detail paint them once they're in place. So they go together without any issues whatsoever. Next up is what I'm doing here is cutting out the periscope that is going into the driver's hatch. There's two pieces that need to go in there. I used Tamiya liquid cement, but you have to be very careful how much you use. I just put the most minimal amount on, and I'm basically just touching the side of the glass and letting the capillary action do all the rest. So basically I make sure everything is in position, and then I come back in and gently, carefully use some glue to hold it in place. This is a little piece that goes on to the driver's hatch. I'm not sure what this piece is for, but it goes right in the front of the hull. These things are what they call ice cleats, and you can add them to the tracks when the conditions are icy or slippery, and they'll give added traction. Of course, every tank should have spare tracks just in case. Again, I could have added these when everything was just bare plastic, but I wasn't sure how I wanted to paint these spare tracks, and like I say, after looking at some references, I decided that yeah, I'm not going to paint them in a way I was thinking of, you know, like maybe rusty or older or weathered. I'm just going to paint them with the camo colors and then come back in and do some aging and weathering that way. More ice cleats. Next up is the gun barrel cleaning rods. little bit of cleanup from the molding seam. Let's do a little test fit and then glue them in place. I'll come back and paint those later. Okay, time to put in the rear view mirrors here, or side mirrors. Okay, there's a bit of a rough seam on the side there, and while most of that probably will be covered by the side skirts that come later, I just like to make sure everything is as perfect as possible. So I'm using a little bit of putty, and I'll come back and sand that out. And okay, we're gonna put the shovels in now, part of the Pioneer gear. Tamiya have the handles for the tool class molded onto the hull. If I was doing this in a more detailed way, I would probably use some photo etch for those tool class just to give it a little bit more realism, but they don't look too bad. Adding more tools. You can see briefly. You can see briefly there the gun travel lock has been glued in place. This is a bandsaw. You never know when you might have to cut some kind of logs for a campfire or something. I think that tool there is to hold up the engine cover. And this here is the rear view camera for when you're backing up into the parking spot at Walmart. You don't hit the Toyota. Often what I like to do is keep things on the tree and then cut them off later, especially small parts. That way are easier to handle. The tow cables that come with this Tamiya kit are pretty basic, but I'm just going to build with the stuff that comes with the kit. Like I've said, this build is aimed at new modelers, beginners. So I'm just going to use what they give us, which is a piece of string. And that's meant to be a steel cable for towing the vehicle or towing another vehicle. So I'm using some cyanacrylate glue or super glue to put it in place, using the measurement that comes with the instruction sheet. course, there's the pickaxe that you need for who knows when or what. Of course, there's a pry bar that is added. And yet some more ice cleats. Just making sure there's enough glue to hold everything in place and everything is nice and straight and perpendicular. So here I am, I'm gluing in that rear view camera. Okay, time to take off that Tamiya putty, smooth everything out. I start off with a pretty rough sandpaper, and then as I go along I get finer and finer sandpaper just to get rid of the sanding marks from the previous grit. Often I like to use water when I'm sanding things. It helps with the sandpaper not being clogged up with all the dry stuff. Okay, we're going to jump ahead here with the smoke grenade installation. As we saw in the last episode, I put the smoke grenade racks in place, and they're firmly set up now so that I can manipulate these smoke grenades into position. What I'm doing here now is I've got some Tamiya tape that I'm cutting up to cover up that plastic periscope material so that I can go ahead and paint the tank with the camouflage colors and then come back and take this tape off, and we'll be left with a nice clear window for the periscope. It takes a bit of trial and error to get these things to fit perfectly, but it's doable. The EMES main sight of the gunner also needs the same treatment with some masking to protect it when we go to paint the camouflage. Next, we have to take care of the periscope for the commander and gunner's hatch. Okay, once all those things have been masked off, we can get into painting the camouflage. I'm going to use spray bombs on this project just because, as I've said before, this is meant to be for somebody who maybe doesn't have an airbrush setup and still wants to have good results when they go to paint this. You don't always need to have primer, and as you can see here, I decided to skip it on the turret. So you want to build these layers up slowly. You don't want any pooling, you don't want any sags. Like, you have to watch your excess paint. So I move that extra armor forward so I can get in behind it. You can see here how if you're using a black primer, it might help you with indicating some depth, because the black will be sort of already in there as a shadow or as an outline in a way. Painting all these parts separately, and we'll come back and add the camo once they're in place. So all the road wheels are basically the one color, the Nato green. So I'll hit all those and make them look really good. Tamiya spray bombs are very good and leave a nice even surface. One thing with these side turret storage bins, you don't want to put too much paint because it'll end up clogging some of the holes in the mesh, and that won't look very good. So everything gets a coat of the green, and then we'll come back maybe with the brown or the black, but we're going to let everything set up nicely. In the meantime, we're going to do some work on these tracks, and I've decided to use a spray bomb of silver that I had on the shelf just to give it that metallic look. A straight silver might be a little bit strong, but I'm planning on doing a lot of weathering to those tracks, so it'll be pushed back into the background, but will still indicate somewhat of a metallic look. So before I glue this part on finally, I'm going to paint that wire reel. At this point, I've decided I'm going to add the driver's hatch permanently now. So we'll let that silver dry up on those tracks really nicely, give them a chance to cure. But in the meantime, I'm going to start painting out the tires that are on these road wheels. And while there may be some kind of masks you can buy out there, I just feel that hand painting them is quite therapeutic and probably way more accurate and clean. I think with those masks, you might get some kind of an overspray. So I'm using a Vallejo Smoke Black, I think is what this is. So it's an acrylic based paint. water-based. And the trick is to have enough of a thinner, in this case water, to allow it to flow with a little bit of capillary action into the areas where the tire is, and then it kind of sucks up to the edge of the wheel rim. For something like this, it's good to have some kind of magnifier, either like something you wear on your head, or you have strong glasses. Since I've noticed in some reference photographs of the real thing that these hubcaps on the wheels sometimes are just bare metal, I suspect they're replacement parts and they've been added after the rest of the wheel has been painted a green. So what I'm doing here is I'm hand brushing some Vallejo silver onto that. Because this is a video meant for beginners, I'm showing it by doing it with hand brushing. If I had my airbrush and I was using my Cameo silhouette plotter, I could cut myself some nice masks and just airbrush that metallic color. But in this case, I'm going to do it with a hand brush. Also, I've noticed in photographs that some of the bolts that are on things like the idler wheel and on the sprocket wheel, the bolts are quite shiny and new. So I'm adding that detail here. Some of the road wheels actually just have the bolts with a silvery look, not the whole hubcap. I didn't like the look of some of the painting I did on those nuts, so I came back in and decided to just paint the whole hubcap. As you can see, I'm kind of working from the edges. I want to get the edge nice and clean so there's a demarcation there, and then I come back and fill in the rest of it. So yeah, here's the sprocket wheel. I'm giving it a treatment where the bolts are new. There was some areas where you needed some touching up because the silver got where I didn't want it to be. And basically I'm just using some Tamiya water-based acrylic of the same color, the number 67 and XF67. I mean, the XF means flat when you have the F. If it's just an X, it's a shiny paint. So again, on the other sprocket wheel, I'm giving it the same treatment. I'm adding some wear to the inside area of these sprockets because when the track interacts with this area, of course some of the paint gets chipped away. I've noticed in photographs also that this rim, this outer rim of the wheel, seems to get a shiny metallic color to it as well. So just to add some visual interest, I'm going along and just basically, it's like a dry brush. I'm not really painting. As you can see, I'm not using the point of the brush. I'm kind of using the side of it. And it's almost like a horizontal stroke. That way I stay out of the recesses and I just pick up on the very top surface of that rim. I find it quite challenging and kind of satisfying to be able to have that clean demarcation. I'm not too worried if everything is so perfect at this point because I'll be coming back in with some washes and dirt and dust, and a lot of this stuff will just be there, but not as crisp and clean as you see it here. This is more like an underpainting. The thing about painting tank models, or any model for that matter, depending on how weathered something is it's built up over a period of time, just like in real life. You need to add layers. So what I start off here with is pristine looking, clean. There will be some dirt and dust and washes. You can see here in these sample photographs I'm taking from a book I have on this vehicle that these things could get quite filthy in the field. I'm not going to be getting this filthy with it, but I am going to be adding some dirt and dust and wear and tear. This metal shock could use some metallic color as well to give it some visual interest. And there seems to be a little red dot that is on the top of the hubcap. So I'm going to use some water-based gloss, clear gloss, and 1 or 2 drops of Vallejo black. You can use a brown or a mixture of brown and black, And you could use things like Future Floor Wax or any acrylic clear gloss. And what I'm doing here is I've taken a little bit of that as the vehicle. It's sort of like the binder for the pigment that is the Vallejo black, and I've added quite a bit of water, a lot of water. Like it's probably like 7-to-1 or more of water. It's not a strict formula. I think at this point I actually decided that I wanted to make it a little darker, so I added another drop. I may have gone a little too dark as I looked at it later, but the thing is I'll be adding pigments to all of this as well. So this is meant to sort of like bring some focus to things like the nuts and any recesses. It helps tell the story of what the detail is. Another side benefit of using this acrylic based wash is that it will allow me to come back later with any enamel washes that I might want to add. And there'll be a bit of a protective layer of this water-based product in between the enamel paint of the green and the enamel wash that I might use in the aging process. If you're a beginner, that's one thing you need to start to understand is what are the solvents of all the different paints and how do they interact with each other, and how you can use that to your benefit. So here I am, I'm finally painting that wire reel. I'm not sure what that is for. It must be for some communication thing. If I had been smarter, I might have actually wrapped some wire around it before I glued it in place, because at this point it's going to be a little difficult to add that detail. But once that's dry, I can actually glue the back of that turret in place finally. So here what I'm doing is I'm using some Vallejo paint, acrylic, on top of that silver, painting out each of the little pads. But I found as I went along that the silver paint, the pigment had a tendency to not be very hardened and was a bit powdery. Metallic paints can often be like that, especially enamel ones. And that's what that spray bomb was an enamel one. So I'm painting these out with that water-based acrylic black color, and I'm hitting the edges as well because I'm just a fanatic for detail. But as I went along, I found that it would basically rub off because the pigment of the silver was not stable. And so what I ended up doing is I had to come back with a sanding stick and remove all of this black stuff and then come back in with a lacquer-based paint. And the lacquer-based paint is probably better than the water-based paint because it will actually bite into the rubber track. Yeah, you can see here I'm able to remove that paint once it's dry with just my fingertips. So I'm coming in with a sanding stick, removing all that work, and then I'll come back with a lacquer-based black. It's a bit of work, but in the end, like I said before, not all of the track needs to be done because only maybe a third of it, if that, will be seen once it's mounted onto the vehicle. So I'm going to use a Tamiya lacquer paint for the pads this time, and that should give me some stability. So once that's dry, I'm going to do a little test fit here. You may notice that I've done a little bit of work on a few of those road wheels with some pigment. They look a bit dusty. I'll be showing how I did that in the future of this video. But right now I just want to see how everything is going to line up. So I haven't really attached the tracks together yet because I want to work with them so I can lay them out flat, because I still have some more work to do with them. Now that they're in place, I can see exactly where I need to paint the pads and how they're going to line up in the front and the back. But again, you can see I'm only needing to do maybe a third of the tracks because half of them will be hidden by the skirt and the others will be hidden because they're flat on the ground. So at this point, I'm going to use a little bit of this rust wash. It's a light rust wash from AK Ammo. And I'm just going in there and dropping it in here and there. So I'm coming back in here with a little bit of paper towel just to remove any of the excess. Next up, I'm going to use some dark wash. Now with both the rust and this dark wash, I'm utilizing some paint thinner, enamel paint thinner, to thin it out and make it flow where I want it to go. Because using it straight out of the bottle, it might be too strong. So I usually have a little side cup of paint thinner, and I'll use that to help move things around a bit. I'll come back and wipe this back as well, just like I did the rust color. Again, it's all about adding layers of different things. Like, I don't really have a formula for what I'm doing here. I'm just basically trying some things out, seeing if I like them. I'll be adding dirt and dust on top of this as well, so again, this is just another layer. This is sort of what they call a pin wash. It's used to sort of draw out some of the details. If you have a surface that's just been painted, it can seem rather flat. And then when you add a wash, it can make things sort of pop out a little bit. The wash will sink into the recesses. It'll wrap itself around things that are proud or prominent, and it'll add some flavor to whatever the surface is. So here what I'm doing is I'm using a few different colors of pigment to make a medium kind of color. This seems a little bit red to me, and I'll probably be coming back later with another layer of pigment that's not so red. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush it on and work it into the recesses. Once I'm happy with how much is on there, I can come back and I can wipe it back with a little bit of water on a paper napkin, or I come back in here with a toothbrush just to get any of the excess out of where I can't reach it, and maybe there's too much, so I can use a toothbrush to sort of like move it around. And also I'm going to be using a Q-tip to remove some of it from the rubber track. But you can see here it's adding another layer, especially to the rubber, the black rubber track. Like in real life, that would not be a black color. It would be an off gray, like a very dark gray, or because of the dirt and dust and water and mud. So you can see I'm trying to take the pigment off the top surface of this rubber track. There may be times when you want to leave it on there, who knows? Maybe it's just run across a really dirty and muddy bit of land, and so it could just end up sticking there. So here I'm using a little Q-tip to get more precise with the removal of the excess pigment on the surface. So another test fit just to see how everything's looking. Definitely more work to be done on these tracks. This is just the beginning. Here I'm just sort of like showing you, once the side skirts are on, that a lot of this track is not even going to be seen. So you don't need to stress too much about that. Okay, I better start working on the other side of the tracks just so I don't get too far ahead. You can see here I'm sanding back that silver paint again. This time I decided I wanted to try using maybe a power tool, and this is my Fordham power tool, and I've got a sanding disc on there just to see how that would help me with my endeavor here. It does go a lot quicker. And then I'm coming back with the old-fashioned sanding stick and cleaning up any of the burrs and hairs that might be hanging out. And then coming in with the Tamiya lacquer black paint again. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything moving forward. If you'd like to help support the channel, become a patron. There is a link in the lower right corner of the channel's banner. In the meantime, and in between time, that's another edition of Jet Scale Models.